Do you ever feel like life online has become one giant performance? You're constantly on stage, even when you're just talking to friends or sharing something small. It's like there's this invisible weight and pressure to constantly be interesting or aesthetic or productive all of the time. Even life offline is at risk of being broadcasted to the internet. Life itself has turned into content. The trip, it isn't complete until you've posted about it, or that memory doesn't solidify until it's shared. We experience things no longer just for ourselves, but also for that audience that lives constantly in our heads. My name is Kate Cassidy, and on this channel, I unpack how tech and media are reshaping our culture and even our minds. Please bear with me, I'm moving right now, so no art is hung up. I'm in a different space. My lighting is funny, but still wanted to hop on and unpack this one with you guys today. Why do we feel so much pressure online, offline, cancel culture, doxxing? All of these things are intertwined, and what can we actually do about it? Let's get into it. There used to be a time when being online was almost like an escape from real life. We went on the internet for a place to explore or create or establish new connections with random people or just share our unfiltered thoughts. But now, increasingly, we're actually seeing the reverse of this. Real life is becoming a break from the internet. We crave those fleeting moments where we get to feel fully present and we don't have to perform for any sort of contrived audience. I see this discussed all the time in my comment section, so I know that I'm not alone in seeing this sort of trend, but it feels like some spaces online are just starting to feel very boring or performative. I suffered from social media addiction for many years, and now I still very much love the internet, and I think that there's a ton of great things on the web, but I like to reflect and dig into and be a little more critical and intentional about my consumption. And something that I used to really feel when I was on Instagram was that every single activity, every single interaction felt like a micro performance. Even something as small as leaving a comment on one of my friends' videos, in my head, it felt loaded. How funny could I be? What emoji combination was still cool? And don't even get me started on the public Venmo feed. Oh my goodness, the amount of times I would spend, or the amount of time I would spend building the perfect Venmo caption to obscure whatever little transaction I was having with my friends. It's absurd, the type of performance for any sort of public feed. Social media has trained us to see ourselves through the eyes or the imagined eyes of others. That's why even when we're not being watched, we still feel that there's this ambient, ever-present understanding that we are being perceived. It's a dialed up, digitally charged example of the spotlight effect, which is a cognitive bias where we believe that we are always being watched. Because we're the main characters in our own lives, we sometimes forget that everyone else has their own lives, and we just project our experience and our feeling of self-important onto everyone else and project this out. And we believe that everyone is watching us all of the time. We think that everyone is focused on us in our worlds too, but this is cognitive bias. This is not reality. And now, because so much of our real life ends up online, our dinners, our dates, our homes, our vacations, there's no boundary between our public and our private selves anymore. And that pressure for curated perfection of our online lives can seep into how we live offline. You can see this when you choose a restaurant or a place to travel because of TikTok or Instagram and how it showed up in your feed and you saw that it was aesthetically pleasing to post from. So you decided to travel to Sardinia because it seems like everyone on TikTok is going to Sardinia right now. Even the outfits that we wear or the hobbies that we take up, often we are unconsciously, subconsciously, running them through the invisible lens of how will this look? How will this look to other people? The environment is ripe for social comparison on social media, on algorithm-driven platforms. Online, you get exposure to constant, endless examples of people who seem to have it all figured out. Even though we rationally know, we know that this is for a curated environment, it's hard to not size yourself up against these parasocial friends or acquaintances, strangers, even celebrities. And it's not always as overt and emotional an experience as jealousy, for example. It's just this subtle pressure to try and optimize our own lives just to keep up. One of the hilarious ironies of it all is that we're all trying to appear so effortless in an environment where systems run on effort. It takes so much effort to appear effortless in your curated feed. And the platforms want us to feel this way. It is a feature, not a bug. The more pressure you feel to stay relevant, the more you're going to post. And the more you post, the more data they have, as well as the more content they have to eventually monetize and put ad inventory around. Engagement metrics and virality have created an environment online where sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the loudest, most extreme, or most aesthetic voices tend to rise to the top. So what do? We start performing to appease for the algorithms on these platforms that we are choosing to create on. And this can be at the cost of being our authentic selves. I've been reflecting on this a lot lately with my own creating journey here on YouTube. I think the one way that I have most started noticing myself and my own behavior mold to the way that the YouTube algorithm actually works is that I try to filter myself a little less. If I have a thought, I try to just say it now, as opposed to historically, I've been a little more intentional with my words, a little more deliberate, a little more careful. But I've been noticing that in an effort to create for this type of platform, I really try and put that aside and just say the thing. And I'm like, if it's wrong or whatever, I'll fix it in post. And then sometimes I'll notice myself in real life, I'll be just saying something. It could be a little out of pocket, whatever, but I just filter myself a little less. So that's one of the struggles that I have as a creator, as someone who intentionally is creating a content business on here. But it's not just creators who are experiencing this. Even people who just average Joe consumers who aren't building content businesses, they also feel some of these familiar pressures. If you take a vacation or get some sort of professional achievement, an award or a promotion, it doesn't feel real and validated until you post it. This phenomenon, paired with the fact that algorithms personalize everything, creates a really strange effect where each of us can live in our own curated echo chamber where what we think of as good or to be lauded, those ideas start to silo. The same narrow ideas of success or performative happiness are repeated to you constantly, over and over, time and time again, until eventually it feels like there's no other way to live a meaningful life. My biggest struggle when I was more online in the past was always related to beauty standards. I struggled a lot with weight and acne growing up, and constantly seeing these potentially face-tuned images popping up on my feeds, on social media, of all the exact same body shapes and their glowing skin. This really messed with my confidence and really destroyed me. I had very low self-esteem growing up. But then on the flip side, when I started to fit these beauty standards more and I lost some weight and my skin started clearing up, the strange thing was that I started oversharing this. I became one of the people that used to stress me out when I was seeing them online. I'd be posting thirst traps and I'd be just showing off these things that had been insecurities. It was all one great performance. And it's interesting to me in retrospect how much the internet turns your identity into content. Everyone's a creator now, whether you have a following or not. And that line between who you actually are and how you are presenting yourself, how you are performing yourself online, that line just continues to get blurrier and blurrier, more and more dissolved. And these moments, these life moments that were just about sharing with your friends and family, all of a sudden, they are moments that need to be strategized. Everything from a birthday to experiencing the grief of a family member passing, this can be a very strategic moment to show up online. They can be documented and made public in order to optimize for engagement, to have a viral moment. Or even if you're not seeking out those growth metrics, you're not a creator, you still get that validation from likes and engagement and the random parasocial relationship reaching out and saying, sorry for your loss. And then when the platform started paying people for their personal lives and to share their personal lives online, that changed the game forever. We no longer have to suffer through that personal, existential debacle that everyone must go through to understand what the meaning of life is or what our own identity is. No, you don't just have to go through that very personal experience with yourself or maybe with your church or religious spiritual practices. Now you have the added angle of how can I perform who I am, not just discover who I am, how can I perform who I am so others can observe, engage, and watch me. Of course, to a certain extent, performance of self-expression is nothing new. I know I was wearing dark clothes and flannels in high school so I could signify to other people that I was a brooding Tumblr girl and I had an impeccable music taste. We use these sort of signifiers to identify ourselves to other members of the group or to contrast ourselves from the norms of society. But with the added digital lens, it becomes a slippery slope. That secondary action of now having to post ourselves and our experiences online trains us to see every hobby, every interest, every facet of ourselves and our personality and our identity, whether we like it or recognize it or not. It trains us to view that through a lens of productivity. Influencers, of course, have to face these kind of questions head on when they have to ask themselves, do I even like knitting anymore? Or is this just now what's paying me and I have to feed the beast? And how did I end up in this knitting niche? Oh my goodness. Ow, who am I? But now anyone with a camera and access to the web can feel that same pressure of wanting to package yourself in a way that you can put online and have it be brand safe or aesthetic. When it feels like everyone else around you is optimizing their lives for an audience, then just being yourself and staying authentic can actually feel like you're underperforming. You're probably getting less likes, you're getting less engagement, you have less followers, and this can psychologically take a strange toll. And then that need for validation, which is of course an innate human condition. We all want to see and be seen and love and be loved and feel like we're understood and be in connection and relationship with others. But now that real desire for connection is being replaced by a literal digital scoreboard that keeps points and shows a tally in the way of likes and comments and subscribers. And to me, one of the scariest recent trends that comes from and is a direct result and consequence of all of us living our lives so publicly and so online is how punitive it has become. Cancel culture and public doxing have made the internet feel like this great digital theater, with everyone constantly watching and judging, or people who are waiting in the sidelines, they're waiting on the wings of the theater, and they are just ready to expose you or pull aside the curtain just at any moment. And this sort of behavior isn't just reserved for company CEOs, which By the way, that whole Coldplay astronomer CEO story, the fact that it became such a national headline really shines a light on the fact that this is the reality that we're living in. I personally found it very disturbing that such a personal matter was being brought to the public attention for anyone to comment on and had this widespread publicity, and everyone was making commentary, people were making jokes. But I digress. I just found that to be so emblematic, or a symbol of the moment that's happening right now. But the reality is this happens in other ways too, just to regular Joes, just to people like you and me. It happens in super subtle ways, like reels of fail videos, or people who post embarrassing moments that come from pranks or just in these public settings that are questionable whether or not they actually obtained consent from the subject to publish that online. There's also ring camera footage that is just being posted, or people are doing all of these variety of street style interviews, and sometimes it seems like people don't really want to be filmed, and yet that still ends up online. Or even now we see these like collective actions that are taken against Karen. We have made ourselves hyper visible. We broadcast our faces and our locations, our routines, from our morning routine to our skincare routine to how we get to work in the morning. All of this we now publish and broadcast for others to consume, oftentimes without realizing that the more that we share, the more vulnerable we also become. I've mentioned this before, but when I did have a TikTok, back when I was working at TikTok and I posted TikTok videos, I would do more vlog day in the lifestyle content. And eventually I was putting myself out there very much, and people started to know my routines, and I had some very creepy encounters because of that. And I didn't even have a large following, but when your identity is online, others feel like they get to be a part of it. They think that they get to comment on it. They want to judge it or add their own commentary. And even one perceived misstep can spiral into a massive amount of public shame or harassment, humiliation. So much can come from this. And an extension of this, kind of the flip side of the coin of this general cultural milieu that we are living in, is something that I actually struggle with here on YouTube. There is a constant fear of misinterpretation. This is at least something that I experience. I know this is going to sound contrary to me just saying that I'm trying to filter myself less, but when it comes to the actual subject matter of what I'm discussing, there are some topics that I would actually love to discuss with you all, but I have heard that people are getting canceled for it on Instagram, or there's just a bunch of fighting on other platforms, stuff that I'm not seeing, but like my sister told me, you shouldn't cover that. You are going to get slandered no matter what side you're on. Or people are also getting canceled for not saying anything about certain subjects. So either way, you're gonna get canceled. It's a lose-lose situation. And I hate to admit that I succumb to this level of self-censorship, but it's the truth. Putting yourself out there authentically online and creating is already stressful enough, honestly. It already is scary to be vulnerable and to share yourself to the world. And then to consider that there might be some major repercussions of saying something slightly wrong, or not having a certain element of nuance to the conversation, or holding a minority political view or opinion, and that might get clipped in a way that sounds kind of wrong, and then all of a sudden it haunts you for the rest of your life. The pressure there is very real. I've even had some of my own friends, just IRL, true daily life friends from all walks of my life. They've casually dropped the fact that when they see someone comment on something that could potentially be controversial or dicey, if they see someone post something like that online on an Instagram story, they will actually screenshot it to hold on to it if and whenever they decide that they want to talk to your employer and give them a call, or talk to your school and try and pressure them to expel you, or get you fired from your job. I couldn't be making this up, and I will also say that is not just from my liberal background. That is not just because I was a radical leftist back in the day. I also get this from some of my more conservative. I have friends on all sides of the spectrum. I tend to lean a little bit more moderate, and I hear this from multiple surprising places. And candidly, I think that this reality is just another consequence of the fact that so many people are chronically online these days. They are so chronically online that they think that this is normal behavior. Of course, when you're on the web, on the internet, and you see this in a comment section, the trolls will always say stuff like, "This is the internet, what did you expect?" But when this starts to bleed into real life and have real life consequences and repercussions, and people are starting to think and act in the same way that they would online, that is when it starts to get more questionable to me. If someone loses their job over getting canceled, or a family is a family falls apart publicly because of some sort of weird doxxing crisis, or if there's that collective action that comes from TikTok where people will leave 1,000 negative reviews on something just because one employee had a weird outburst and it wasn't the entire establishment, but they wanted to get back in it some way. There's some justice. All of these are very real things, and I don't think that behavior sets a good precedent. I just don't. If we exist in a world where both the online and offline environments are constantly being evaluated and have this sort of pressure of extreme social scrutiny, people will eventually become more cautious, more performative, and more curated. Sure, maybe it feels like people are just being fake these days, but in reality, they may just be afraid. They may not want to get into hot water or misstep, so instead, they start this self-censorship process. And in tandem, especially for younger folks, in tandem to this cancel culture, there's also a rise in cringe culture. Vulnerability and sincerity gets mocked and turned into memes. So it's no wonder that people return to and retreat into these very polished versions of themselves, because that way they won't feel embarrassed. We're simultaneously being told to be authentic while also knowing that because of the reality of this situation, because of this cultural milieu, knowing that our authenticity can be weaponized against us. It's a very real predicament, and I honestly don't know the answers. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. As always, let's have a discussion. How do we stay sane in this world that tends to reward insanity from its roots in that offline behavior? The first thing that we have to remember is that these algorithms are not neutral, and neither is the attention economy. People are benefiting from this, but we always do have agency and can take some of that power back. You can start by setting some digital boundaries, like asking yourself before you post something, am I posting this because I really genuinely want to share? Or am I posting this because I feel like I have to for some way? Am I feeling some sort of outside pressure? Remember that you do not owe the internet a performance. You don't owe them anything. Another helpful thing is to practice selective engagement, like muting accounts that trigger you. You can curate and create a digital environment that doesn't compromise your mental health at the same time, because at the end of the day, your mental health sometimes does depend on creating that digital garden. And I think one of the potentially most important things is to start more intentionally protecting your offline life. Not everything needs to be documented or turned into content. It doesn't. You also don't have to monetize your hobbies or your life or your image. You don't have to do this. You literally don't. I think there's something really wonderful about the joy of having private moments, something that just belongs to you or you and the close friends and family that you shared it with. Not the rest of the world. The rest of the world doesn't get to be a part of everything that you do. It doesn't. The more that you ground yourself in real experiences, the less control all of these other systems have around you, the less control and power that they have. At the end of the day, the goal isn't to escape the internet. I mean, I love the internet. That's why I'm here. I think there's a lot of great stuff on the web. I mean, maybe that's just me. Maybe there's a little bias there. But it is important that we are intentional in not letting it define who we are. In some ways, we've all been actors in the same endless performance, chasing relevance in systems that are designed to extract from us and addict us. So let's all try together to stop performing and start just being. Thanks so much for tuning in. We will talk again soon. Bye.